For more, I want to bring in CBS News Justice reporter Paula Reid. She joins me now from Washington. So, Paula, earlier Attorney General Sessions spoke about the decision to wind down the Dreamers program. What's the legal points here? What did he raise in defense of ending DACA?
Rena, he argues that President Obama's program was unconstitutional. He points to the fact that it was implemented after Congress rejected implementing some similar solutions. And his legal argument is that the president can't do this. This is an overreach of executive power. And he argues that ultimately this would not be upheld in the courts. But Rena, it's actually not that clear. I mean, on similar issues, courts across the country have pretty much just split on this issue. It's not really black and white whether or not this was constitutional.
And it's interesting because there are several state attorneys general who are threatening to sue the president. Do those folks have a legal leg to stand on this case?
Absolutely. They have the right to file suits. And of course, the state of Texas and about 8 other attorneys general threatened to sue the Trump administration if they did not rescind DACA by today. So that was another argument that Sessions was trying to make, that he had to do this. Otherwise, this would be caught up in litigation. But Rita, there's another group of attorneys general from different states who have said that they plan to sue if it was rescinded. So ultimately, this will wind up in the courts. And what we know is that a similar program that would have extended privileges to the parents of DACA recipients, that split the Supreme Court 4-4. Now that we have a new conservative justice, it is possible that programs like this use of executive power could be found unconstitutional, but inevitably, Rena, this is headed for the courts.
So you do think it'll go to the Supreme Court, Paula?
If not the Supreme Court, it's certainly going to go to some lower level courts. Whoever loses will certainly appeal to the circuit courts. And it does appear that the issue is ripe for Supreme Court review, especially because they split last year on a very similar question.
So, Paula, I'm a little curious. The president was very forward during the campaign trail of coming out saying this was something he wanted to do. Why didn't he own it and come forward and say, this is what I'm doing? Why send out Sessions?
It seems that the optics of this decision, they're bad. And if you want to distance yourself from this decision, I think ultimately the president's plan is to pin this on Congress come the midterms and the next election. Well, they did or didn't do something. But for now, he's sending out a surrogate, and Attorney General Sessions is kind of the perfect surrogate for 2 reasons. First of all, he's the nation's top law enforcement official, so by sending him out, you are effectively framing this as a legal issue. And then also, there's the fact that Sessions has opposed this policy since it was first implemented 5 years ago. He has been very consistent in saying that he believes that this is unconstitutional. And Rita, you may remember when the president started publicly criticizing his attorney general several weeks ago, sort of tweeting a lot of criticism about him, there was an interesting development where a lot of very core Trump supporters came out squarely Team Sessions. In fact, they said, look, a lot of the Trump administration's accomplishments, specifically on immigration, they are credited to Attorney General Sessions, sort of saying back off. And here it's interesting that he sent Attorney General Sessions to be the messenger, delivering on what is a controversial decision, but ultimately delivering to that base.
Yeah, and he's served many years in Congress, certainly has many friends in the halls on Capitol Hill. I want to ask you, though, what happens to all the personal information the government's collected and all these Dreamers?
That's a great question, and one that we posed to Department of Homeland Security officials earlier today, and it's not exactly clear, because in order to qualify for the DACA program, you had to provide a lot of personally identifying information: your name, your address, your status, in some cases employment information. And when we asked, we were told, well, that information will not be shared with law enforcement officials, but there was no guarantee that if this program goes away, that the database of information goes away. And I think that's a real concern because they've already seen some DACA recipients who have been apprehended by law enforcement. Many of them have been released once it was established that they had those DACA permits. But once all of those go away, there's a real question about what happens to all of this information that the government has on these people who will at that point just be here illegally.
Yeah, it's something that we've all wondered. I want to ask you, though, how this compares maybe to the White House's decision to end when they rolled out the Muslim ban at the start of President Trump's administration. Are there any legal comparisons that can be made between the two decisions?
Well, it does appear that they learned a lot of lessons from the travel ban. If you remember the first executive order on immigration, there was chaos at the airports. That order was signed and they tried to immediately implement it. Rena, I remember being on the phone with Department of Homeland Security officials that night. None of them knew what was going on. They had no guidance. There was no rollout. That's, of course, why we got the second travel ban, and it was not immediately implemented. There was a little bit of a delay. There was clear communication between that he had an attorney general, he had a chief of the Department Department of Homeland Security at that point, there was a lot more planning. And here we see that again. This is not an immediate policy. This will be rolled out over several months. There are certain carve-outs and exceptions. It's clear that they've learned a lot of lessons from what happened with the first 2 executive orders, these big immigration policy changes. And they're also, it seems to be, getting smarter about what they need to do to try to ensure that this is ultimately upheld by the courts.
All right, Paula Reid, thank you for explaining all this to us.